His wife poured boiling water across his hand in front of her entire family, looked him in the eye, and told him to remember his place. And he did. He remembered exactly where he stood, which was as the silent majority shareholder of the private equity firm that controlled every single dollar of her family's $10 billion empire. He remembered that his signature was the only thing standing between her family's legacy and complete financial collapse. He remembered that for 10 years they had called him the accountant at their dinner table while unknowingly eating off a foundation he had built with his own name and his own money before any of them had ever heard of him. He did not say a word that night. He wrapped his burned hand in a cloth napkin, picked up his jacket, and walked out the front door. What happened next didn't just cost his wife a marriage. It cost her family everything they had spent 30 years building. And it happened so quietly, so precisely, and so completely that by the time they understood who had done it, there was nothing left to save. The question is not whether he had the power to bring them down. The question is, how long had he been waiting for a reason to use it? If this is the kind of story that makes you sit all the way up, go ahead and hit that like button right now. And if you are new here, subscribe so you never miss what we drop next. And before we go any further, drop your city in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from today? We love seeing where our family is tuned in from. Now let me take you all the way back to a Thanksgiving evening in Atlanta, Georgia, to a dinner table where a quiet man stood up from his chair for the last time, and a woman who thought she knew exactly who she had married was about to find out she had never known him at all. The Cross family estate sat on a wide, manicured lot in Cascade Heights, the kind of neighborhood where every driveway had 2 cars that cost more than most people's mortgages, and every lawn was edged like it was being graded. The house itself was brick and colonial and enormous, and on Thanksgiving it smelled like candied yams and perfume and old money that wasn't quite as old as it believed itself to be. Theo Odom had been coming to this house for 10 years. He knew where the good coat hooks were, the ones by the side door that actually held weight. Because the decorative ones in the foyer had been pulling loose from the drywall since year 3, and nobody had fixed them. He knew that Bernard Sr. always took his sweet tea without ice even in August, and that Constance Cross required every dish to be on the table before anyone touched their fork, and that the piano in the living room hadn't been tuned since 2019. He knew all of this the way a man knows things when he pays close attention for a long time and no one pays close attention to him. He sat at the far end of the long dining table, the seat closest to the kitchen, the seat that said guest without saying it out loud. There were 14 people in that room, cousins, aunts, a neighbor who had been coming to Cross Thanksgiving since before Vanessa was born. Theo knew all their names, and he was fairly certain fewer than half of them knew his. Bernard Jr. stood at the head of the table, doing what Bernard Jr. always did at Thanksgiving, which was carve the turkey as though the act itself was a form of public speaking. He had on a shirt that cost $400, open at the collar, and he held the carving knife like a man who wanted you to notice he was holding it. Now you know I would have had Theo do the carving, Bernard Jr. said, sliding the blade through the breast with a practiced pull. But I didn't want him to submit an invoice afterward. The table laughed. Not all of it, but enough. A cousin covered her mouth. An uncle shook his head with a grin. Constance Cross smiled at her son with the particular pride of a woman who believes her child is charming. Theo picked up his water glass and took a slow sip. He looked at Vanessa. She was reaching for the bread basket. She did not look up. The meal moved the way it always moved, loud and warm and full of conversations Theo was adjacent to but never inside of. Bernard Jr. talked about the Cascade District project like he was narrating a nature documentary about himself. Press mentions, the city council reception, the Chicago money that was finally moving. Vanessa laughed at the right moments and touched her brother's arm twice. Constance refilled everyone's glass except Theo's without appearing to notice she had done it. Theo refilled his own glass. He had done this for 10 years. He was good at it. Said it was somewhere between the sweet potato pie and the second round of Bernard Jr.'s Cascade District monologue that Vanessa set down her wine glass, pressed her palms flat on the tablecloth, and stood up. The room quieted the way rooms do when they sense something coming. "I need to say something to this family," Vanessa said. Her voice was even, practiced. She had the composure of a woman who had rehearsed this in a mirror. "Theo and I are divorcing. I've already spoken to an attorney and the paperwork is being prepared." She paused for exactly the right length of time. "I've also been seeing Brandon Ellis for the past several months, and I didn't want anyone in this family to hear that from somewhere else." Brandon Ellis, Bernard Jr.'s law partner. The man who had been at the last 4 cross-family functions and whom every person at that table already loved without having decided to. There was no gasp. That was the part that would stay with Theo longest later, when he turned the evening over in his mind the way you turn a stone in your hand. There was no gasp. There was a murmur, and then someone said Brandon's name warmly, like a confirmation of something already understood, and Constance Cross looked across the table at her daughter with an expression that was not surprise. Theo stood up. He did not say anything. He pushed his chair back from the table, placed his napkin beside his plate with the same deliberate care he brought to everything, and rose to his full height. That was when Vanessa reached across the serving station. The carving pot of au jus had been sitting on the warmer at the edge of the table, dark and glossy, and still sending up thin threads of steam. She lifted it with both hands, and in one long, unhurried motion, she poured it across the back of Theo's right hand. The sound it made was a sound he would not forget. He did not cry out. He stood completely still while the heat registered, while 14 people sat in their chairs and did not move, while Vanessa set the pot back down on the warmer with a small ceramic click. "So you remember this moment, Theo," she said. "So you remember your place." He looked at his hand. He looked at her face. He picked up the cloth napkin from beside his plate, wrapped it around his hand, with the focused calm of a man who had decided something, and walked toward the front hallway. The legacy wall was there, from the way it was always there, Bernard Sr.'s monument to 30 years of building something from the ground up. Plaques and photographs and commendations in matching frames hung in a chronological line that moved left to right like a timeline of the Cross family's ascent. Theo stopped at a photograph near the bottom left corner. A groundbreaking ceremony. 2003. A younger Bernard Sr. in a hard hat, shaking hands with a man whose face was turned toward the construction site, away from the camera. The man was wearing a Howard University class ring on his right hand. Theo looked at his own right hand. Through the cloth napkin, in the dim hallway light, the same ring caught the same light. He walked out the front door and pulled it shut behind him. Inside, no one spoke for 3 full seconds. To understand why Theo Odom said nothing that night, why he wrapped his burned hand in a napkin and walked out of that house without raising his voice or making a single threat, or giving anyone in that room even one reason to remember him as anything other than a man who left quietly. You have to understand what 10 years inside the Cross family had actually looked like. Theo Odom grew up in West Philadelphia in a row house on Warrington Avenue, where the radiator knocked all winter and the front steps needed fixing, and his mother, Carolyn West Odom, left for work every night at 11 o'clock in her white uniform shoes. She cleaned office buildings downtown, 12 floors, 5 nights a week for 22 years. She never once described it as hard. She described it as hers. Theo watched her do that work and absorbed something from it that no classroom ever taught him. He absorbed the understanding that dignity was not something other people gave you. It was something you built in the dark before anyone was watching, and you carried it so quietly that the people who underestimated you never even knew what they were standing next to. He put himself through Howard on academic scholarships and work study, graduated with honors in finance, and spent the next 15 years building Odom Equity Partners from a single rented office in Silver Spring, Maryland, into a firm managing $2.3 billion in assets, 41 employees, a reputation in institutional finance circles for being precise, patient, and unmovable. He did not advertise it. He did not explain it. He simply did the work and let the ledger speak. He met Vanessa Cross on a Friday evening in October at a Howard Alumni Gala in Washington, and for the first time in a long time, Theo Odom was not thinking about work. She was electric in a way that felt effortless, and she laughed at everything he said with a warmth that felt in that room like the most generous thing he had ever been offered. He fell completely. He would spend years trying not to regret that he had. They married 11 months later. In the first year, the love was real. He knew it was real because he remembered it clearly even after everything that followed. The same way you remember the last good night of sleep before a long illness, the Cross family revealed itself gradually the way cold does, not all at once, but in a slow, steady drop that you don't notice until you're already numb. Bernard Cross Jr. established the dynamic at the very first family 4th of July. He was behind the grill in a Cross & Sons development polo shirt, holding a pair of tongs like a scepter, and when someone at the table mentioned that Theo worked in finance, Bernard Jr. looked up with a smile that stopped just short of his eyes. "Oh, so you're the accountant," he said. Aiken turned back to the grill. He said it like it was a compliment. That was the craft of it. It landed soft enough that Vanessa could pretend she hadn't heard the edge, and sharp enough that everyone else at the table understood exactly what had been communicated. Theo was an accountant, a man who handled other people's money, not a builder, not a Cross. The nickname held. Every gathering, every dinner, every holiday at the Cascade Heights estate, the accountant said with a grin. Always plausibly friendly, never once corrected. Constance Cross, the family matriarch, operated differently. Her method was subtler and in some ways more corrosive. She would ask Theo a question about something financial, the market, a business decision, a contract structure. And then, while Theo was still forming his answer, she would turn to whoever was sitting nearest to her and redirect the conversation entirely. When Brandon Ellis began appearing at Cross family gatherings in year 3, Constance asked him the same types of questions and received his answers with a smile and a nod and the full attention of the room. Brandon Ellis was Bernard Jr.'s law partner. He was charming in the practiced way of men who have learned that charm is currency, and the Cross family spent it freely. He knew the right things to say about the right things, and he never said anything that made anyone uncomfortable. Constance liked him immediately. Bernard Jr. treated him like the brother he'd wanted. And Vanessa, Theo began to notice in year 4, laughed differently around Brandon. Not louder, but lighter. Like she was being seen in a way she needed to be seen. And Theo did not make scenes. He was not built for scenes. He was built for the long view, for the slow, patient accumulation of the truth, and so he went home after each dinner and sat in the small locked office off the hallway of their Atlanta home and did his work. The office was neat to the point of severity. One desk, one lamp, one monitor, one filing cabinet with a lock that Vanessa had stopped asking about. On the wall, a single framed photograph of the Odom Equity Partners building in Silver Spring. A modest professional structure on a tree-lined street that held inside it more architecture than the Cross family had ever imagined existed in Thea Odom's life. He kept it locked not to be secretive. He kept it locked because he had learned that the moment people know what you have, they stop showing you who they are. He went on working, or he said less. He absorbed the accountant with the same stillness his mother had absorbed the overnight shift, not because it didn't register, but because he understood that the ledger was longer than any single evening at a dinner table. By year 5, Theo understood that in the Cross family, silence was not mistaken for dignity. It was mistaken for defeat. The second 5 years would be worse, because the Cross family finally had something real to celebrate, and Theo was not invited to celebrate it with them. That phone call to Patricia was not a reaction. It was the beginning of something Theo had been quietly deciding for longer than even he admitted to himself. He drove to Silver Spring on Monday morning. He had not been to the Odom Equity Partners office in 3 weeks. He had been working remotely and managing the Charlotte deal by phone and email, keeping his professional world separate from the Atlanta one the way he always had. When he walked through the glass doors of the building on Fenton Street, the receptionist looked up with her usual good morning, and then her eyes dropped to his right hand and stayed there for exactly 1 second too long. He was wearing a light compression bandage over the burn. 3 inches across the knuckles, still tight and hot beneath the wrapping. "Good morning, Simone," he said, and kept walking. He passed 2 analysts in the hallway who both noticed and both said nothing, because Theo Odom's staff had learned in their first month of employment that he did not invite questions about his personal life. He went into his corner office, closed the door behind him, set his bag on the chair. Aidan stood at the window for a moment looking out at the tree-lined street below. Then he sat down, picked up his desk phone and called Patricia. She answered on the second ring. He told her everything. He told her about the dinner and the divorce announcement and Brandon Ellis and the 14 witnesses and the pot of au jus in the cloth napkin and the walk to the front door. He told her about the legacy wall and the ground-breaking photograph and the Howard ring on the turned man's hand. He told her all of it in the same measured voice he used in board meetings, and while he talked, he unwrapped the compression bandage from his right hand and set it on the desk and looked at what was underneath. The burn had settled into a dark, defined mark across his knuckles. It would scar. He already knew it would scar. Patricia did not make a sound for the entire time he was talking. When he finished, the line was quiet for 4 full seconds. "How long until closing?" she asked. 29 days, he said. "I'm on my way," she said. She was in his office in 40 minutes with a leather portfolio under her arm and the particular expression she wore when she had already begun working the problem before she walked through the door. She was the best lawyer he had ever encountered in 15 years of doing business, and she was his cousin, and she had been his first hire, and she was the only person alive who knew the full architecture of what he had built. They moved to the conference room. Theo pulled the Cross & Sons development corporate records from the filing cabinet he kept in his office. The cabinet with the combination lock, and the one that held the documents that governed the quiet machinery of everything Odom Equity Partners had ever touched. He set the records on the table. Patricia opened her portfolio and laid out the Cross & Sons articles of incorporation From 2003, the original seed capitalization agreement and the Cascade District Initiative closing documents in 3 clean columns across the conference table. They read, they cross-referenced, they did not speak for 20 minutes. Then Patricia placed her index finger on a paragraph near the bottom of page 7 of the 2003 articles under a section heading titled Majority Partner Rights and Transferability. "There it is," she said. Theo leaned over and read it. He had read it before, years ago when the articles were first filed. And he read it again now with the particular attention of a man whose circumstances had changed. The clause was standard in structure and devastating in implication. It stated that in the event the founding limited partner, Odum Equity Partners, chose to exercise its dormant majority interest, it could invoke a full buyout of executive voting authority, transferring 51% of Cross & Sons Development's controlling shares to the limited partner entity, with 30 days written notice to the board of directors. Odum Equity Partners had never dissolved. Theo had never transferred the interest. It had simply sat there in a paragraph on page 7 of a document that Cross & Sons' own attorneys had drafted and their own patriarch had signed for 21 years. "It's fully enforceable," Patricia said. "Unambiguous language. I know sunset provision, no counter clause. They never added one." She moved to the Cascade District closing documents. She found the disbursement authorization section and turned it to face him, her finger on the line that mattered. Every capital disbursement through Meridian Anchor Holdings required the authorizing signature of the controlling member. Theo Odum was the controlling member, not a board, not a committee, him. The deal could not close and not $1 could move without his name on that line. Theo sat back in his chair. The Cross family had spent 10 years calling him the accountant. They had built their greatest triumph on a foundation that required his signature to stand. Bernard Jr. had toasted the Cascade District deal at every family gathering for 2 years, not knowing that the quiet man at the end of the table held the pen that would either sign it into history or freeze it into nothing. Theo looked at his burned hand. He placed it flat on top of the articles of incorporation, palm down, scarred knuckles against the page that had his name on it. Patricia said they had 29 days until the scheduled closing. Theo said that was more than enough. They did not act immediately, because precision mattered more than speed, and Theo had learned from his mother that the work you do before anyone is watching is always the work that counts the most. They did not act immediately. That was the first and most important decision they made together, and it was Theo's instinct that drove it. Precision mattered more than speed. His mother had taught him that without ever saying it directly. She had taught it by example, by the way she pressed her uniform the night before every shift, by the way she never left a floor half done. You do the work completely or you don't do it at all. So they worked. The conference room at Odum Equity Partners became their operating table for 3 full days. Patricia brought in 2 bankers' boxes of Cross & Sons financial records that Theo had been quietly accumulating for 3 years. Not because he had anticipated this moment exactly, but because in private equity you maintain visibility on your assets. It is not optional, it is the job. And Theo had been doing the job with his usual thoroughness long before Vanessa ever stood up from that Thanksgiving table. The audit materials came first. Patricia spread them across the left side of the conference table in chronological order, year by year, from 2018 through the current fiscal period. Theo worked through them column by column with the same unhurried focus he brought to every deal, and what emerged from that work was a picture so clear it was almost elegant in its corruption. Bernard Jr. had been running personal expenses through Cross & Sons Development for 6 consecutive years. Not sloppily. He was not a stupid man. but consistently and with the quiet confidence of someone who believed no one was ever going to look closely enough to find it. A fleet vehicle registered to Cross and Sons that Bernard Jr. drove exclusively and personally. A vacation property in Hilton Head, South Carolina, depreciated on the company books as a client hospitality asset. Tina Lake House in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, billed internally as a regional retreat facility for which there was no record of a single client visit in 4 years of documentation. Personal memberships, wardrobe expenses, a kitchen renovation at his private residence run through a vendor that Cross & Sons had paid 6 separate invoices to without a single work order tied to a company property. The total, when Patricia finished the final tally on the morning of the second day, was $4.3 million in improper distributions across 6 fiscal years. She set her pen down and looked at Theo across the table. He nodded once. They moved on. The cascade sequence came next. This was the architecture of what would happen, the order of operations, and they mapped it with the care of surgeons planning a procedure. The buyout notice would go first. That was the foundation of everything. Once Odom Equity Partners formally invoked its majority interest, every subsequent action had legal standing. After the notice landed and the board convened, Theo would call a formal shareholder meeting and vote to suspend Bernard Jr.'s executive authority, which would trigger the internal audit as a matter of standard governance procedure. The audit findings would then be referred to the IRS Atlanta field office. Simultaneously, the municipal contract inquiry would be filed, and then, when all of those pieces were in motion, Meridian Anchor Holdings would notify the Chicago Pension Fund of the governance review. The Cascade District closing would go into suspension, all $10.2 billion of it frozen in place pending resolution. Theo sat back in his chair and looked at the sequence written out on the legal pad in Patricia's precise handwriting. It was not vindictive, it was structural. Every piece of it was grounded in legal fact, corporate obligation, and documented evidence. Not one step required Theo to act outside his authority. He was simply exercising the rights that had been his for 21 years, rights that Cross & Sons had chosen not to read carefully enough to understand. The third conversation was with Darius Webb. Councilman Darius Webb had served on the Atlanta City Council for 11 years. He was also a deacon at Theo's church, a man who had watched Theo serve on the youth ministry board for 9 years and who, in all that time, had never once heard Theo mention Odom Equity Partners or anything connected to it. He knew Theo as the quiet man who showed up on Saturday mornings to help set up chairs and who always brought peach cobbler to the bereavement committee potlucks, and who stayed after service to make sure the folding tables were wiped down before he left. Theo called him on a Thursday evening and asked to meet privately. They sat in Webb's constituent office the following morning, and Theo laid 3 pages of audit findings on the desk between them. He did not editorialize. He did not explain his personal history with the Cross family. He simply presented the financial disclosure inaccuracies in Cross & Sons municipal contract filings and explained that as majority shareholder, he had a fiduciary obligation to surface them. Councilman Webb read all 3 pages without speaking. Then he looked up. "I'll file the inquiry Monday," he said. Theo thanked him and drove back to Silver Spring. Patricia had the formal buyout notice ready by Friday afternoon. 6 pages. Every citation precise, every section reference confirmed against the original 2003 articles. She read it aloud to Theo in the conference room, and he followed along on his own copy, and when she finished, he set it down and told her it was ready. They decided on Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock. Bernard Jr. arrived at the Cross & Sons offices every Wednesday at 8:45. He would be at his desk, he would be in his chair, he would be completely unprepared. Theo reviewed the Cascade District closing documents one final time on Tuesday night. He did not sign them. He set them back in the folder, closed the folder, and placed it in the center of his desk. He went home. He slept well. The notice was served at 9:04 in the morning on a Wednesday, and Theo was at his desk eating a bowl of grits with his coffee when Patricia sent him the 2-word confirmation by text. It's done. By 9:31, Bernard Jr.'s world had already begun to move beneath his feet. He just didn't know yet how far it would fall. Bernard Jr. was at his desk at 9:31 when his assistant put the first attorney on hold and told him a second one was already calling on line 2. He didn't know yet. That was the thing. He was annoyed, not afraid. He thought it was a paperwork dispute, a vendor complaint, something routine that his legal team would handle before lunch. He was wrong. The emergency board meeting convened by early afternoon. 7 people in the Cross & Sons conference room. At the same room where Bernard Jr. had held court for years, the same room with the framed architectural renderings of the Cascade District on the wall. His board, his table, his room. The registered agent had forwarded the notice. The board's outside counsel had reviewed it overnight. The conclusion was the same no matter how many times they read it. Odom Equity Partners held 51% of Cross & Sons development. The interest was valid. The buyout clause was enforceable. The filing was airtight. Bernard Jr. read the name of the firm 3 times out loud. Then he read the name of the CEO, Theodore Odom. The room went completely silent. Bernard Jr. stood up, excused himself, and walked to the men's room. He was gone for 11 minutes. His executive assistant, who heard everything through walls thinner than people assumed, and later told her cousin told her pastor mentioned it at Wednesday Bible study, quietly, the way church people mention things they know they shouldn't repeat but absolutely will. Theo was in Silver Spring when Patricia called to confirm the board had convened. He was reviewing the Charlotte deal. He set the file aside, listened, and said thank you. Then he picked the Charlotte file back up. The second domino fell within 48 hours. Theo called a formal shareholder meeting and exercised his majority vote. Bernard Jr.'s executive authority was suspended pending an internal financial audit. It was governance procedure, clean and standard. The audit had already been assembled. It had been sitting in a locked cabinet in Silver Spring for 3 years, organized by fiscal year, flagged by category, totaled at the bottom of the final page. $4.3 million. Patricia's office delivered the referral to the IRS Atlanta field office on a Thursday afternoon. By Friday morning, a case number had been assigned. The third domino. Councilman Darius Webb filed his formal inquiry with the Atlanta City Council on Monday. 3 pages. Municipal contract disclosure irregularities on 3 active Cross & Sons projects. The school renovation in DeKalb County, the parking structure in Midtown, the pedestrian bridge in Vine City. Every fact sourced, every figure documented. A local business reporter picked up the council filing by Wednesday. The story ran Thursday. It was not front page. It didn't need to be. In the world the Cross family inhabited, the civic luncheons, the Chamber of Commerce mixers, the church announcements, the barbershop conversations on Saturday mornings, a city council inquiry was sufficient. People talked. People always talked. Constance Cross, who had spent 30 years building a family name that could walk into any room in Atlanta and be greeted with deference, started getting calls she didn't know how to answer. The fourth domino was the largest. Meridian Anchor. Holdings sent a routine governance update to the Chicago Pension Fund on a Tuesday morning. Controlling capital partner conducting internal review. Closing delayed indefinitely pending resolution. Standard language, professionally worded, utterly devastating. The pension fund's general counsel issued a material adverse change notice within 48 hours. The Cascade District Initiative, $10.2 billion, 2 years of negotiation, Bernard Jr.'s entire identity for the last 24 months, went into formal suspension. Not cancelled. Suspended. Theo was precise about that. The deal was simply waiting on him. Bernard Jr. reportedly sat in his car in the Cross & Sons parking garage for 45 minutes after the pension fund notice arrived. Nobody went to check on him. His staff had learned quickly, in the last 2 weeks, that the man they worked for was not the man they had believed him to be. The fifth domino was quiet, personal, and in some ways the most satisfying of all. Brandon Ellis discovered that his law firm's retainer agreement with Cross & Sons Development, their largest client, a 34% of annual billings, that was now subject to approval by the majority shareholder. Theo reviewed the retainer on a Thursday morning. He found 3 billing irregularities in the first pass. He did not approve it. Brandon Ellis called Vanessa that same evening. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. He did not call again. Vanessa started calling Theo's cell phone the next day. She called 11 times over the following 2 weeks. He watched her name appear on his screen, and he set the phone face down on his desk and went back to work. Patricia sent Vanessa a single written communication directing her to retain divorce counsel. All further correspondence through attorneys. That was all. The Cross family's empire had not been destroyed. That was important to understand. Theo was not a man who destroyed things, and he restructured them. He corrected them. He put his name where it had always legally belonged, and let the law do what law does when it is applied precisely and without anger. By the time the last domino fell, the masthead of Cross & Sons Development read differently than it ever had before. Theo's name was on it now, right where it had always been, in the documents, in the articles, in the paragraph on page 7 that nobody had read carefully enough. Vanessa was not a woman who accepted silence, and eventually she stopped calling and started driving. She drove 4 hours from Atlanta to Silver Spring on a Tuesday morning and talked her way past the front desk by giving her married name. The receptionist, a young woman named Simone, who had worked for Theo for 3 years and who understood, without being told, that something significant had been happening in the firm for the past several weeks, looked up Vanessa's name, found it listed as next of kin in the employee emergency contact system from when Theo had filled out his benefits paperwork 9 years ago and made a judgment call. She would think about that judgment call later and feel that she had been played. Vanessa walked down the hall, found the corner office, and opened the door without knocking. Theo was at his desk reviewing a financing structure for a commercial development deal in Charlotte. He had his reading glasses on and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, and a cup of coffee at his right side that had gone cold an hour ago. He looked up when the door opened. He looked at her for a moment. Then he took his glasses off, set them on the desk, and closed the Charlotte file. But he did not stand up. He did not tell her she could not be there. He simply looked at her the way a man looks at something he has already fully understood and is no longer surprised by. Vanessa sat down across from him without being invited. She had driven 4 hours and she had not slept, and it showed in ways she could not perform her way out of. Her eyes were swollen at the corners. Her composure was the kind that takes effort to maintain, visible effort, the kind you can see working in real time. She was not there to apologize. Theo knew that within the first 10 seconds. She was there to negotiate, to find leverage, to locate some angle that would give her family back the ground they had lost. There was no such angle. But she didn't know that yet. She started talking. She said things about the marriage. It's about the mistakes she had made, about her family not understanding what they had done. She said things that were almost true and carefully arranged. She was still performing, even now, even here. It was the only register she knew. Theo let her finish. Then he looked down at his right hand, which was resting on top of the closed Charlotte file. The scar tissue across his knuckles had settled into a pale, defined line. 3 inches long, permanent, a record of a Thanksgiving evening that he would carry for the rest of his life. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he placed both hands flat on the desk, left over right, and he began to speak. His voice was the same voice he used in every board meeting, every closing, every conversation that mattered. Quiet, precise, completely without anger. You poured that pot on my hand so I'd remember my place, Vanessa. So I want to be precise with you right now, out of respect for what we were to each other once. He paused, not for effect, because the next thing he was going to say was something he had never said out loud to anyone outside of a conference room, and he wanted to say it correctly. Your family's company has been mine, majority mine on paper, in the articles your father signed in 2003, since 3 years before your brother started calling me the accountant at your dinner table. The $50 million that capitalized Cross & Sons came from Odom Equity Partners, my firm. The buyout clause your father's attorneys buried on page 7 of those articles gives me 51% of voting control the moment I invoke it. I invoked it 3 weeks ago. Vanessa's expression shifted. The composure cracked at the edge, like a hairline fracture in something that had looked solid. The $10.2 billion deal your family has been celebrating for 2 years, he continued. It closes when I say it closes, not when the pension fund says, not when the city says. When I sign the disbursement authorization through Meridian Anchor Holdings, my name, my pen. She opened her mouth. He continued. The audit that is currently sitting on an IRS examiner's desk in Atlanta was built from 3 years of Cross & Sons' own financial records. $4.3 million in improper distributions. I did not manufacture that number, your brother did, over 6 years, because he believed no one was ever going to look. I looked. Because when you are the majority shareholder, you have a fiduciary obligation to know what is inside your asset. Vanessa was very still now. The calculation that had been running behind her eyes, the search for the leverage point, the angle, the way out, had gone quiet. What replaced it was something rawer, something that was not performance. I did not come to your family's table as a charity case, Theo said. I came as the man who held the pen. You just never asked whose name was on it. He let that sit in the room. Then he said, Do you remember the photograph on your father's legacy wall? The groundbreaking ceremony 2003. The man with his face turned toward the construction site, the Howard ring on his right hand. He lifted his right hand from the desk, slowly, the scar catching the morning light from the window behind him. That was me, he said. It has always been me. Vanessa's composure did not crack. It dissolved, quietly and completely, right there in his office, without an audience, without anyone to redirect the moment. Her eyes filled and her jaw set, and she looked at a point somewhere past his shoulder for a long time. Brandon Ellis had not called back. The deal was suspended. Her brother was under federal inquiry. And the man she had burned and dismissed and allowed her family to diminish for 10 years had been, the entire time, the foundation underneath everything they believed they had built alone. Theo picked up the Charlotte file. He opened it. He put his reading glasses back on. My attorney will be in touch about the divorce, he said. You can show yourself out. She showed herself out. And Theo did not watch her go. But what came after was not revenge, it was resolution, and Theo had always understood the difference. The IRS inquiry concluded 14 months after the referral was filed. The finding was formal and unambiguous: $4.3 million in unreported income, $890,000 in fraudulent business deductions, and a penalty assessment that left Bernard Jr. with two choices: negotiate a settlement or face criminal referral. He negotiated. The settlement required $2.1 million in back taxes and penalties, a signed resignation from the Cross and Sons Board of Directors, and a formal acknowledgement of the findings. Bernard Jr.'s attorney released a one-sentence statement to the press, describing it as a resolution reached in the interest of the company's continued operations. Bernard Jr. himself said nothing publicly. He took a regional sales position with a construction supply company in Birmingham, Alabama, and he drove to work every morning in a company vehicle that was not his own. The man who had spent 10 years calling Theo Odom the accountant at every family gathering was now, himself, a man who worked for someone else's paycheck. Bernard Cross Sr. called Theo directly on a Tuesday morning, 2 days after the restructuring of Cross & Sons was formally announced. Theo was in his Silver Spring office. He answered on the third ring. The call lasted 6 minutes. Bernard Sr. was not a man who apologized easily. Theo had understood that about him from the very beginning. From the first time he had sat across from the patriarch at a Sunday dinner and watched him hold court over his family like a man who had never once been wrong about anything, which made the apology, when it came, land with a weight that was impossible to ignore. Bernard Sr. said that he owed Theo an apology for what his family had allowed to happen. He said it plainly, without qualification. He said he had known, somewhere in the back of his mind, that the way his son spoke to Theo was not right. He said he had said nothing because it was easier not to. Theo listened. When Bernard Sr. finished, Theo thanked him and told him he meant it. He did mean it. That was the kind of man Theo Odom was. The divorce settled 3 months later under Georgia law. Theo kept Odom equity partners. Vanessa received a fair settlement. The legal definition of equitable, calculated by attorneys, signed and filed, nothing more and nothing less than what the law prescribed. Theo did not contest it. He did not inflate it, and he did not reduce it. He simply signed where Patricia told him to sign and moved forward. The Cascade District Initiative closed 11 months after Theo lifted the governance suspension. It closed on his timeline with a restructured construction leadership team that he had handpicked from a national pool of qualified firms, and with Cross & Sons Development retaining the general contractor position under new executive oversight and a revised fee structure. The ribbon cutting was covered by 3 television stations and 2 national trade publications. Theo was not at the ribbon cutting. He was in Silver Spring, reviewing a deal in Charlotte that had been waiting patiently on his desk. He allocated $12 million of his personal proceeds from the Cascade closing to establish the Odom West Foundation, and he named it for his mother, Carolyn West Odom, who had worn white uniform shoes to work 5 nights a week for 22 years, and who had never once described that work as anything other than hers. The Foundation's inaugural program was a finance scholarship for first-generation college students from West Philadelphia and Southwest Atlanta. The application was straightforward: transcripts, a financial statement, 2 letters of recommendation, but it also asked one question that was not standard, one question that Theo had written himself and that Patricia had told him was unusual, and that he had kept anyway. Describe the work ethic of someone in your life who never received credit for it. The first class was 14 scholars. Theo read every application personally. He read them at his desk on Sunday mornings with his coffee. He and Patricia found him there once, reading, and she did not interrupt him. She simply set a fresh cup beside the old one and left him to it. The foundation's inaugural dinner was held at a hotel ballroom in Midtown Atlanta on a Saturday evening in October, almost exactly 2 years to the month from the night Theo had walked out of the Cross family estate with a burned hand and a cloth napkin, and the quiet certainty that something was about to change. He was seated at table 7. The woman to his left was named Adrienne Lawson. She was a structural engineer who had overseen the load-bearing framework on 2 of the Cascade District's residential towers, and she had, Theo noticed immediately, the particular ease of someone who had never once performed anything for anyone's approval. She laughed at something the keynote speaker said, and the laugh was completely unguarded and completely real, like someone who had simply found something funny and responded to it honestly without checking first to see who was watching. They talked through dinner. They talked through the keynote and through the dessert course and through the coffee that followed. She asked him what he did. He told her he worked in finance. She asked, "Do you like it?" And Theo Odom, for the first time in longer than he could measure, said yes. Not because it was the correct answer, not because it was what someone in his position was supposed to say, because he meant it, fully and without reservation. He liked the work. He had always liked the work. It had simply taken 10 years inside the wrong room to remember why. Power does not announce itself, but it waits. It builds in the dark before anyone is watching, in locked offices and conference rooms and late-night phone calls and 3-year audits that nobody knows you have been quietly assembling. And the people who look at a silent man and see a defeated one are not reading the room correctly. They are simply reading the present and mistaking it for the future. Theo Odom had never mistaken the present for the future. That was always the difference. Now, before you go, I want to ask you something. If you had been in Theo's position that Thanksgiving evening, burned hand and all, knowing everything that you now know was waiting for you on the other side, what would you have done? Would you have walked out as quietly as he did? Or would you have said something? Drop your answer in the comments right now. Because I read every single one and I want to know what this community thinks. If this story moved you, if it had you leaning forward in your chair or pausing whatever you were doing to hear what came next, please hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second and it helps this channel reach more people who need to hear stories like this one. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is the time. We drop new stories regularly and you do not want to miss what is coming next. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. That means everything. I will see you in the next one.